Welcome to DIA Today, Democracy in America Today. I'm Matt Parks alongside Dave Corbin. Glad to have you with us as we explore the ideas behind today's headlines. So we've wrapped up the fall semester, Dave. At least our students have.
Yeah, just grading to go, which is always a little bit of a crunch right before Christmas. But yeah, no, it's great. I think it's a great day. I remember my freshman first semester, and then just the joy of getting through that first set of finals and all the rest. So I hope all of my students have a great weekend and 3 weeks and start back up again.
Yeah, technically my students have about 7.5 hours to turn in their exam. No doubt they've all got it done, and they're just waiting for me to check out tomorrow morning. But in the off chance there's someone still working on it, they do have a little bit of time left to try to squeeze in a few more words, a few more observations on things. So we know how that is. And, as we were thinking about it, we've really wrapped up our first semester on the podcast here. Season 1 is the way that it's recorded in official podcast language, but really semester 1 for us. And, I guess we've made it through our first fall semester of the freshman year, which, is a challenge for everybody, right?
Yes, 30 shows. So that's actually, we probably did about a year's worth of work. So we should get credit for 2 semesters. But
I want 6 credits, yeah.
I want more credits for that. But it's been great. I think that, going into it back in May, our hope was to dig a little deeper behind the headlines and try to make these connections between ideas in the past and why things are going on. And, with that perspective, thus be able to kind of have more intelligent, conversations about things. And that produces a more civil discourse, peaceful elections, et cetera. So it was a total success on every front.
Nailed it.
Start the show in May, and then the transition has just been smooth for the country, for the presidency, et cetera, right?
I think the biggest challenge we've had is there just hasn't been much going on. You feel like you're just sort of straining for things to talk about with a global pandemic, a highly contested election, all the questions around race. Just there wasn't really much for us to take up over the course of these last 6 months or so.
No, it's hard to find an episode title each week. That's the great thing. There's always more news, and I'm sure there'll be more next year. But we have decided, right? I think that we're going to switch things up a little bit, but more on that to come. Correct?
Yeah, we'll take a few weeks off. That's our first announcement here. So this will be our last episode for about 3 weeks, and our next one will be coming at you on January 16th. So you can catch up on your rest, enjoy the Christmas season, the New Year's. We'll be back at it come January 16th. We thought we'd maybe do a little bit of a quick review of season 1 here and think back some of the highlights of what we've been able to talk about, and then talk a little more about our plans for season 2 beginning in January. So how about favorite topic, Dave? We've had a chance to hit a variety of different themes here, but what's the one maybe that's stuck out most for you?
Well, I really like the discussion on authoritarianism and totalitarianism. I just started listening to a book by Rod Dreher titled Live Not by Lies. And it's really excellent because he spends a lot of time, at least in the beginning of the book, kind of going through what totalitarianism is as a threat, and did something similar, kind of comparing authoritarianism, totalitarianism, and it just suggested that we were on the right track in our assessment, of some of these topics that are defining of our time. I think likewise, the conversation we had last week referencing Joshua Mitchell's American Awakening. I mean, these are issues, right? The question of identity politics that they're not just here in 2020 or 2021. They could be generational defining issues. And I think that those are the fun ones for me, because as the moral of Dreher's story goes, the more that you can begin to understand what these things are on the front end and prepare for them, it might not be that you can stop them from happening, but you'll have a response for them when they make their way into your life. So those have been some of my favorite episode themes.
Yeah, I guess for me, one of my favorite conversations was our discussion of different strands of conservatism and thinking about kind of where that movement has come from, going back to the 50s and 60s and the fusionism of Frank Meyer, and then how that intersects with our challenges today as we look forward. That was a great symposium that we were able to walk our way through this series of essays. And also the conversation we had with Pete Peterson a few weeks ago that kind of picked up that same theme, and we're thinking about this communitarian conservatism, what's that look like? And just thinking about how do we organize political ideas moving forward? How do we kind of frame a consistent position that we can use to navigate these churning waters and to kind of give us a good starting point for political reflection? We know that the biggest challenge, I think, in our day is not to get knocked off by the latest Twitter outrage, the latest thing that's, got the headlines everybody's screaming about, and to be able to just kind of settle in and catch your breath. And, I think that's one of the things we've been trying to do with this as we've gone through, especially this election season and all the controversies, and separate, okay, what are the reasonable concerns? What's, the crackpot theories and the foolishness, and it's not easy. It's not easy trying to navigate the media world in which we live and all these challenges. So I found that conversation particularly helpful. I guess the other one that I would highlight was our discussion of the Amy Coney Barrett nomination. And I think just, that really stood out, that moment, her hearings, the way that she presented her vision of the judiciary as really one of the highlights of this last half year, just really grounded and impressive. And all the games people were playing there in the hearings, outside the hearings, all the theater, and to have a person just unflappable, serious, and kind of honest presentation. This is actually not just the theory that we talk about in class. This is somebody who's taking that theory into the highest court in the land, who buys into it, who can articulate it effectively, and who's now, in her earliest days on the court, carrying it out. And so there's a lot to look forward to there as you sort of follow the career that we expect her to have on the Supreme Court. But that was just one of those moments where you feel like we got a break from the games, and we got politics distilled to statesmanship in a way that we unfortunately rarely get to see that these days. Even when we seem like we have moments of statesmanship, it's always kind of mixed in with the partisan games and hackery. But there was something fresh and pure about that I really appreciated.
Yeah, I think, Matt, I agree completely. That was one of those areas where we saw, the ideas that had framed Barrett's jurisprudence, and she fully put them on display, honestly, said that she was not a policymaker. She was someone who was going to read the Constitution, and whatever constitutional safeguards are there, she will defend those safeguards, those liberties that come from the Constitution. And that's exactly what happened in the case of the Roman Catholic Diocese of Brooklyn v. Cuomo. She and others on the court were able to put into place, I think, a landmark case for religious liberty that they've shown that they'll continue to build upon, which has to be a great relief for many individuals who were very interested in having a court that went back to the Constitution and secured our ability to worship, as we see fit. So it's a great instance of an idea that had a consequence that proved to be great. Probably my political highlight of the year was just that ruling in that case.
Yeah, and it's already been several more cases that have been remanded to local courts in light of that ruling. So I think there was a Colorado case and New Jersey as well. And these are limitations that were not as severe as New York and California. So they're really trying to carve out some significant space for churches to secure, and synagogues, of course, to secure their rights to free exercise of religion. How about favorite authors?
Well, I always go back to Pierre Manent. I think I've referenced him 3 or 4 times this year. He is an author who I think has done the best job of just breaking down the situation that we find ourselves in as moderns, this trend towards being disabled by the powers that be from acting and participating and also from exercising our speech. on political matters, and his call that for a recovery of the West that'll be based upon that collective civic action and activity, that participation. We saw that, as you mentioned, in the Pete Peterson interview. I think we've kind of addressed it on multiple occasions, just how important it is not simply to win an election or to win an argument, but to know that the course forward is the long, hard, but often joyful exercise of being a citizen within a community, being a friend to a neighbor, et cetera. So I think Manent, as a thinker, I think touches upon that as a good starting point for where we'll see a recovery.
Yeah, and related to that, I think of Yuval Levin and the pieces we looked at with regard to gratitude that he wrote, and others. Really, there's probably been 3 or 4 places along the way where we've turned to him as another one of these sober voices who's able to see the forest amidst all the trees, often seemingly ablaze, and who's able to kind of take us back to fundamental principles, and just seems to have escaped some of the hyper-partisanship of this period. Another person, as we mentioned last week, that we've really gotten a lot of benefit from has been, I think, Andy McCarthy. Very clear-sighted legal analysis. It's very helpful, and somebody that you can count on as being a reliable, fair-minded student of the law and able to help you navigate some of these complicated legal questions in light of his long experience and practice as a prosecutor and legal analyst. So I've certainly grown even more appreciative of his work as we've kind of gone through these last 6 months. Now, how about your favorite Gradebook?
I like the animal one because I think that when I looked back on it, I would probably stick with that grading system. The only change I would have made is I think I put scorpion in as an F. That was what I give it. And I think I changed that after my 8-month Texas experience to fire ants, which would kind of line up also. Yeah. The fire ant is a fairly amazingly annoying creature.
Yeah.
You don't even know they're there, and it's not just 10 of them. They're like 1,000 of them, on your ankles before you even know it, mowing your lawn. So, yeah, I like the animal system. I think what the cow was my A, so I just switched the F to a fire ant, because and what's going to happen now? I'm going to go out and have a fire tonight, and I'm going to get bit by a scorpion and reverse the call. But
right. Yeah, those fire ants, when we visit my in-laws in East Texas, you got to keep your eyes open. You're not going out there in sandals unless you're really brave. So, yeah, I agree with you. Definitely not as bad as a scorpion sting, but they're certainly around more often. You're probably more likely to have trouble with the fire ants, at least you hope.
Yeah.
But, I hear you. Yeah, well, I'm ready to assign grades. I'm not sure I'm going to use the animal-based system for the semester, but it will be probably fun at moments to think about that a little bit for a little bit of a moment of humor in the midst of all the grading over these next probably 4 or 5 days as I wrap up the semester.
If you had a student with a good sense of humor, though, and they wrote just a terrible final exam, and that was a fire ant.
Right.
I'm like, what does that mean? Well,
yeah.
It's not an A,
Right.
I mean, what's it begin with? So
right.
Try it on someone with humor.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like on a final exam, that might be tough. But on a assignment with a lesser stakes, I might try something like that. I also enjoyed grading the time zones. It seemed like sort of the height of frivolity.
We need more suggestions on that grade.
We'll get to that. Don't get too far ahead of yourself here, but coming soon, we'll talk about more of that.
Okay.
So how about best pick? This is somewhat ironic, of course, and relative, since hasn't been great for us on the picking front, but we've gotten a few right, and you pick enough things, you're going to get some right. So any especially memorable for you, Dave?
Well, I did get the hockey Stanley Cup champion, the Lightning, correct? I kind of stuck with that right through, even though I'm a Bruins fan. So that I think was my highlight pick of the year, maybe the only highlight I've had. My picks have been a running joke. I've got to figure out what's going wrong, and if we continue this, just make a change with my style. But yeah. One right.
Yeah, I don't know that you really need to change it. I mean, it helps to have a little bit of a lighter segment. So, if we can get some good humor out of that segment and at your expense, doesn't really bother me anyway. So
Appreciate that.
I'm pretty proud of my World Series pick. I got both teams correct, and then got, of course, the Dodgers winning. Now, to be fair, picking the Dodgers wasn't the hardest thing to do, but they hadn't won one in 32 years, so certainly they were favorites, but hadn't done it. So I'm happy about that one. All right, well, let's turn our focus now to season 2. Now, you may not have realized you were even at the end of season 1. We haven't been talking a lot about seasons, but as we've kind of thought about this moving forward, we thought, well, we are academics, and we like that, as we've said before, that rhythm of the start and stop of semesters. And so maybe, Dave, why don't you talk a little about the idea we have for this next series of shows coming up in this beginning in January?
Sure, yeah. So we subtitle the show The Ideas Behind the Headlines. And of course, we've begun with the headlines, and I think that probably a lot of our listeners enjoy kind of that, kind of going through the news and trying to find whatever issue it was that week and kind of putting it in a kind of clear 15 to 20 minute block and give an analysis of it, and then turn to the ideas to buffer that assessment of the headlines. So what we thought we'd do in season 2 is the reverse. We would try on the front end to begin with a discussion of a required reading that everyone would know. We'd announce what it was going to be the week prior. It'd be about an hour-long read for folks, and then we would spend the first half of the show on that required reading, and then move thereafter to talk about some headlines that are kind of representative of whatever the idea that we're exploring that week. And along the same lines, I had some people ask, would you ever put on a semester class like season? So I said, I think that would be a great idea. And we're both teachers of political philosophy. And I think my favorite class of all time when I was in college was a class titled Politics and Society, taught by a professor named John Kaiser at the University of New Hampshire, who's now retired. And my favorite class to teach, since I started teaching 25 years ago, has been that same class, an introduction to the classics of political philosophy, a survey course, if you will, where you start with Homer and then pivot to Plato and Aristotle, Xenophon, Thucydides. You make your way through medieval classics and the early modern political thinkers. And I think it's a class that, when everything's said and done, 15 or 16 weeks into it, leaves you thirsting for more of a discussion of these ideas. So my idea, Matt, was to do this for season 2. A survey course in political philosophy, and then work the headlines after that survey. So hopefully, we won't lose half of our listeners by announcing this change. Hopefully, it'll be something where you could kind of share the news with others, and perhaps have someone join us starting January 16th and kind of make their way through this project. So a national kind of podcast book club, so to speak.
Yeah, and we will certainly be focusing on making the ideas understandable and applicable, explaining the reading and doing it in a way that I think can be engaging. So I think having the readings in advance, if anyone wants to prepare, that would be great and a good opportunity to think about things before we have a conversation. I'm looking forward to that. We've team taught in the past. We did that a 2-semester class on the Federalist. That was a great time. One of my highlights of my teaching career. I think just having the dynamic of team teaching. There's sort of a playfulness that goes along with that, but kind of the intellectual challenge of being engaged with each other and testing ideas and pushing back on this interpretation or that application or what have you. So I think it'll be a lot of fun to think about it as, in some ways, a team taught class. And again, I think what we're going to find is that as we go through these texts, that there's going to be a lot that they have to say about our present circumstances. And so I think if you're somebody who likes to follow the political news, the big stories closely, you're not going to miss out, because we're going to just reach those same stories by the back door. and we'll be able to then show these deeper trends and deeper ideas that are really driving our political dialogue, even when we're not able to acknowledge them or able to necessarily discern them in any obvious way in the particular speeches and policies of political leaders.
Yeah, so now we have the drum roll. What's the first reading going to be for January 16th? I mentioned Homer and going back to the beginning. But before we go back to the beginning, I think it would be helpful, especially given the namesake of the show, to read the author's introduction, Tocqueville's introduction to Democracy in America. It's about a 20-page length introduction. Will take you an hour to an hour and a half. And there's a reason why we select that excerpt from Democracy in America, a particular reason why we select that excerpt, and that is that Tocqueville does something amazing here in his introduction. He's able to outline the reason why he wrote Democracy in America by placing the book within the context of larger forces in world history. And mentioning here that there is something historically that's going on in the world that's changing it, but that there are also principles, there are also philosophic principles that you can turn to, tools that you can employ to understand history. That it's not an either or where you have to have these abstract forms and ideas that have nothing to do with the real world, or a groundedness that has nothing to do with ideas and reflection and contemplation of custom, culture, of eternals, that both go hand in hand well. And I think that Tocqueville picks up on this because he's also seen it in great authors of the past. And we'll begin with Tocqueville, and from there go back 2,500 to 3,000 years and march our way through the spring, through the course of Western civilization, hopefully being able to pick up a lot of these excellent ideas and paradigms on how we can understand the world better.
Yeah, I think Tocqueville is a great place to start because he's really fundamental for understanding the political culture that we live in this longer view, post French Revolution, post America Revolution. What's the basic lay of the political land? And he's observing this transition from aristocracy to democracy. Aristocracy has been the dominant regime type for thousands of years by the time he's writing. And he sees that period of aristocratic regime is waning, it's being replaced, and that democracy is emerging. And so now we live in that world. And yet, through de Tocqueville, as you're suggesting, we have this lens through which we can then work our way back into that aristocratic age, understand what it was that defined that age and the ways that it continues to influence our political life, but do so having laid out the broad contours of that political life and understood what's significant and different about the age in which we live in comparison with what's come before it.
Yeah, I'll just add one more thing, Matt, about de Tocqueville that I think will be a particular interesting aspect of his presentation for those in our listening audience who are Christian believers. He asks the question, are things moving in the direction they're moving because of God's providence? And if they are, what is the Christian's response to that movement? And I mean, I think that's a question that's on many a Christian's mind in the year 2020. We've seen dramatic changes in how we live, cultural norms, customs, etc. How do we make our way in a world where these changes are happening? What do we do? What is our response? And what can we turn to? Of course, we turn to the Bible and we turn to God's Word to try to make sense as to where we are first. But how do we respond? And I think that this is a place where our appreciation and understanding of political philosophy can act as a good supplement to that turning to the Word and making our way forward. So hopefully that will happen also in the spring.
One last thought on season 2, a resolution of sorts. So I don't know about you, Dave, but many of us, that first semester of freshman year, we don't just have our academic challenges. We have our challenges of eating and weight gain and the notorious freshman 15. And I think we had our own freshman 15. You look at the early episodes, they were about 45, 50 minutes long. And by the end here, we've been clocking in around an hour or an hour and 5. So we're going to try to get back into our skinny jeans for the new season, make it more like a 45 to 50-minute podcast. We know your time is valuable as is everybody's. And so we want to make sure that we give you the most succinct and yet thoughtful presentation of the ideas that we can.
Not going to point any fingers, but the long-winded, movement through the headlines each week, you almost got the sense, as if one of us, kind of missed out on a career in news reporting or something like that, and kind of would have liked to be working for Fox News right now. So
yeah, well,
I have to go back and do the math and see whether it was the required reading or not. But I tried to be as concise as possible.
Yeah,
but
some of us didn't do quite as good a job.
Okay.
Well, it may be that if we look at the timestamps, and we have all those timestamps in the show notes, so we can go back and we can add it all up. Now, what they don't know is that every week I'm often trimming 10 or 15 minutes, sometimes 20 minutes off it. So you can be grateful for that. That at least I have contributed to sparing the listeners' time. All right, but we're going to turn to the Gradebook, and the obvious Gradebook topic, as you've probably already begun to process the hole in your life that you're anticipating over these next few weeks as we take this break. What should you do with that 45 minutes to maybe an hour and 5 that you were using to listen to DIA Today over these next 3 weeks? So we got a couple ideas we're going to grade. So number 1, catching up on the required reading. We all know how it is, end of the semester, right? A lot of things you want to get to, can't quite get done. What do you think, Dave?
I'd have to give that an A, given that I've assigned most of the required reading, and probably it's been skimmed. I'm not pointing any fingers at our listeners, but
or hosts,
or hosts, exactly. That's right, or presenters, exactly. So, yeah, I think that's an A, and now's the time. You have 3 weeks, and then Democracy in America comes on January 16th. So, yeah. An A for catching up with the required reading.
Okay. Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I think there's a lot of good things there. And again, you can always go back the show notes. If you subscribe to the podcast, that's one of the benefits. We have a pretty extensive show notes. You can get all the links to the articles that we cite, as well as at least the name and reference for the older pieces. If it's a common text, we won't always link to that. Those are easy to find. You can Google those. If it's a contemporary piece, we'll always have the link in there as well. So should be able to track those down if you want to go back. And as we've been talking about some of the shows that we've enjoyed, if one or two have come to mind, you thought, oh yeah, maybe I should go back and take a look at that. There's a chance to do that. Okay, number 2, discover a new podcast.
I like it. I think that I've actually kind of gotten into the whole podcast thing. My wife was on a podcast. She was interviewed for a podcast that I thought was just a terrific idea, especially this year where there are probably very few high school reunions. Her class president from her class at Arlington High School in Massachusetts, I won't say what year, interviewed some 40 or 50 of his classmates, kind of caught up with where they are in their lives. And I thought it's a really great concept. You have all these people that you went to high school with, and where are they now? And the ability to kind of tune into a podcast and hear people's stories, I think, is a pretty neat reconnection. So I'm sure there are other excellent concepts like that out there in the podcast world. So I'd likewise give that an A, but don't get too caught up in any of these things because we want you back by the middle of January, right? So listen for a couple weeks, but realize that we're your bread and butter podcast.
Right. There's obviously a risk here, right? But yeah, actually it's all the rage now in our family. My oldest daughter has actually started a podcast with several of her friends called The Book Diaries, and they put their first episode out last week, and it's about Little Women and their love for that, and the book versus various movies and a few other topics. And my son is actually working through an idea of a podcast with his best friend called Pod Racers, which will, of course, talk about Star Wars and things like this, but pod Nice little pun there. So we might be a 3-podcast family before too long, which I feel badly for my parents, who are obliged to tune into these things. And yet, it's what are you going to do with your retirement days, right? So keep the content going. But there's other good podcasts out there. It's a world that I hadn't really gotten into too much until the last year or two. But, as an old radio listener, now that the podcast is sort of taking away some of the best content from the radio, I'm glad to discover all the neat different kinds of shows that are out there. So I'm going to give that an A also. All right. Lastly, and maybe the most urgent, send us some good ideas for the Gradebook.
A++. We need more and more ideas, more feedback on everything would be great. So you won't hurt our feelings. Well, maybe you'll hurt our feelings, but hopefully the show will be improved. But anything you'd send would be great. Any comments? And is there where would they send those things to, Matt? Yeah,
well, we've got our Instagram account, so you can connect with us through that, Democracy in America Today. But we also have a Gmail account, democracyinamericatoday@gmail.com. So you can send ideas that way. You can also look us up at the King's College in Providence. Neither of us has got hidden emails, at least in terms of our institutional emails. So yeah, I'd be glad to hear from you as the person who's often the one coming up with the ideas for the Gradebook. It's one of our frequent conversations around the dinner table come Wednesday or Thursday in a week where I haven't come up with anything. And so it's good to have fresh ideas and things to talk about. So yeah, I would definitely be glad to hear from you on that or anything else related to this show as we move forward. All right, well, we have to do the crystal ball. As bad as it sometimes is, last week I was 1-4. The only game I got right was picking against the NFC East, so that was at least some consolation. But cumulative record now 31-28, so dangerously close to falling below 500. I've been proud of the fact that I've been at least above that all along, but it's not looking good if I have a bad week this week.
Did I go 500 last week?
You were 2-3. So, I mean, that was pretty good. The Columbus Crew came through for you. That was key.
Wow. Okay.
Alliteration always wins when it comes to the MLS championship. And then you got Army, which we're not going to talk about anymore. So this week, though, we've got a lot of really big.
Notice there that you don't do my cumulative record. I mean, I'm understanding that's probably just too bad that you just don't want to reference anymore.
Yeah. Well, we can update that. Yeah. So your cumulative record now is 18-41. So we can talk about that as much as you want, but I was thinking we might want to just move on.
Okay. Yeah. Let's move on.
All right. So we've got some big college football games this weekend. And we're going to talk about the 3 that have the most college football playoff implications. So first we have the Big Ten Championship, number 14 Northwestern against number 4 Ohio State in Indianapolis. Ohio State a 19.5-point favorite. Dave, what do you think?
Ohio State by 38 points, I'm going to say. I think they're just going to blow them out. I think Ohio State's really a really good team.
Yeah, the way I've been thinking about these 3 matchups is how much do the style points matter? Right? If you're trying to get into the college football playoff, how much do you need the style points? Because if you don't need the style points, you secure the win, and then maybe you make sure your best players don't get hurt, that kind of thing. But Ohio State's only 5-0. There's going to be a controversy about whether they deserve to be in the playoff, unless they just absolutely blow Northwestern away. So I think they're going to do that. I agree with you. I think it's going to be a huge, huge win for Ohio State, because I think there's a real possibility that if it's a narrow victory, they might not get that 4th spot. I think Ohio State knows what they have to do, and that's win big, and that they will do that. How about ACC championship game? Number 3 Clemson against number 2 Notre Dame, Charlotte, North Carolina. Rematch of Notre Dame's 47-40 victory last month. Of course, that was with Trevor Lawrence out because of COVID. Clemson is a 10-point favorite.
I also think here, and I like your analysis about the seeding, I think Clemson wins by 3 touchdowns. I think that they really turn it on, from beginning to end. And they don't want to go back to a 4th seed or even be knocked out. And I think so. They need to win. So I would take Clemson here.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think this is going to be probably 2 to 3 touchdown win for Clemson. I don't think they'll totally blow them away. Notre Dame's a good team, obviously, but I think Clemson has all the reason. They're out for revenge. They need the win. 2 losses be a very dangerous position for them with respect to making the playoff. Notre Dame's coach just said today that he's not sure if his team will play in the Rose Bowl, if that's the playoff game that they would be assigned, if they can't have friends and family there, or at least family there. So I think Clemson can make that a lot easier with a big win, and I wouldn't be surprised if Notre Dame actually misses out on the playoff if they lose badly. Number 3, SEC championship game. Number 1, Alabama against number 7, Florida, playing in Atlanta. Alabama, another big favorite, 17-point favorite.
I think they cover. I think Alabama is aiming to kind of be this Alabama team is aiming to be one of the best, if not the best, Alabama team. Their offense is incredible, so they can score points. I mean, Florida can score points as well, but this strikes me as a game that'll be like 59-35 or something like that. But I think Alabama can cover in a game like that.
I'm going to go the other way on this one. I think Alabama is in a situation where a win is good enough for them, and I don't think they're going to put the pedal to the metal on this. So I think they probably get a nice, comfortable lead early on and then back off a little bit. Might be kind of a backdoor cover where Florida scores the last 10 points in the game or something and loses by 10 points. Florida's got an outside chance at the playoff. If they were to beat Alabama, that would be a very, very impressive win, obviously. After losing to LSU last week, I think they're going to be ready to fight hard. And, of course, they've got a Heisman Trophy candidate who's going to want to impress the nation with that stage available to him to do that against Alabama's own Heisman Trophy candidate. So I think there's a lot of reasons to think Florida's going to fight hard. I think Alabama doesn't have quite the motivation as Florida for this one. They certainly want to win, but I think a win will be enough for them. So I think Florida is going to be able to cover the 17 points. All right, that's college football. Now we got 2 NFL games. Our NFC East game of the week, we've got the 5-8 49ers at the 4-9 Cowboys. Cowboys coming off a huge win last week, 30-7. Now it was over the Bengals, to be sure, but still, 30-7 is 30-7. Now at home, but disrespected. 49ers a 3-point favorite. What do you think?
I'm going to take the Cowboys here. I think they're still in it, right? They could still, if they won out, they could win the NFC East. So yeah, I'll go with the Cowboys there and take the 3 points.
Yeah, how often can you say that? 4-9 team still in it, still got a chance at the division crown, but absolutely, right? Stranger things have happened. So yeah, right now Washington's got 6 wins, so certainly 3 wins would do it. I'm not sure the tiebreakers work if they can get in with 6 and 10, but yeah, they've got something to play for sure. I'm going to take the 49ers in this. I think the 49ers are underperforming this year. They've got some of their offensive weapons coming back, it looks like, and Brandon Ayuk is primed for a big game. George Kittle might even be back. So if he's back, I'd feel very comfortable about this. But I think 49ers are able to cover the narrow 3-point spread. And probably not a big win, but enough. All right, lastly, game of the week, maybe the game of the year, possible Super Bowl preview, Kansas City Chiefs at New Orleans Saints. We just found out Drew Brees is going to start for the Saints coming back. Chiefs are a 3-point favorite.
I think the Chiefs win this, not by a landslide, but they win by more than 3 points. I think when this game is over, people will be asking the question, can anyone stop the Chiefs? Can anyone prevent them from winning back-to-back Super Bowls? I mean, they've kind of shown the last 3 or 4 weeks that, they'll get down by a touchdown or so, and then they'll just turn it on. And when they press that button, they just go. And I mean, he's amazing. Mahomes is amazing. He's fun to watch. And I don't really think that Breeze is all what has been in the past. I mean, all definite Hall of Famer, but I wonder whether he'll be able to come back and hit a rhythm right away. So going with the Chiefs here.
Okay, yeah, those are all good reasons. I'm going to take the Saints anyway. I think there's a Cinderella story here. I think Breeze is going to come back. It's going to be one of those moments at home. He's winding down his career, and he's maybe got a couple games left. He's going to be highly motivated. He's not going to want to lose this game at home. it's going to be tough. There's no question about it. But if Mahomes is slightly off, and you got Michael Thomas maybe finally have a big game, Alvin Kamara. I mean, there's some amazing weapons. If Breeze is able to just hang in there and breathe after breaking all of his ribs, I just have a feeling there's kind of a storyline here where the Saints pull this thing off, and maybe that's it. And maybe no one beats the Chiefs again, and they ride all the way to the Super Bowl. But I think the Saints are going to win this one last time. Big win for Drew Brees at home.
What a weekend if you're a football fan. That between that game and the two college football matchups, all you can want and more. So really great weekend.
Yep. Absolutely. Well, that's going to wrap it up for this week's show, and that's going to wrap it up for the next several weeks. Thank you, as always, for listening. We look forward to being back with you in January. In the meantime, please remember to subscribe and review the show on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, and Stitcher. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year.
Merry Christmas.